So we talked about pollution in the context of it being an externality, right? So firms are producing and they're generating this pollution, which harms people external to the market. So the government gets involved to find ways, regulations, or taxes, or marketable pollution permits, or moral suasion, ways to, whatever the negative externality is, ways to get firms to reduce the production of that externality, or get individuals to behave in a way, smoke less, or not drink and drive, or not text and drive. Get people or firms to stop generating so much of that externality. And so we talked about that, particularly in the context of firms emitting pollutants, and the things that we could do to get closer to what I refer to as the socially efficient level of pollution, which is kind of a strange concept, because we kind of, isn't the socially efficient level of pollution zero? Don't we want no pollution? And we kind of do. I mean, sure, we want no pollution, but we also have to think, just like anything else, there's always a benefit of no pollution. Totally clean air is great, but there's also a cost. What do we have to give up? And so if we think about it, so I put pollution reduction as the good here, because we're used to thinking about supply and demand, marginal benefit, marginal cost in terms of goods, right? In terms of things that we want. We could think about it in terms of things that we don't want, but it would just be, it wouldn't fit our brain the way we're used to looking at our marginal benefit and marginal cost curves. So pollution reduction is a good. So down here, we have no pollution reduction, which means 100% pollution, toxic death, we can't even live. And then as we reduce pollution more and more and more, we get all the way down to this other extreme where we have absolutely not one micron of pollutant in the environment. There's no detectable trace of any pollutant that might be known to harm humans or any sort of life. So ideally, we kind of think, yeah, 100% clean is great, except what do we have to give up to get it? And how much is it really worth moving from 98% clean to 99% clean? So you have to think about that. In the case of toxic death, be like, yeah, those first few units of cleanup, those are worth a lot, right? I'm willing to pay probably almost an infinite amount not to die a toxic death. So to get the basic cleanup, we're willing to give up a lot. But as we get cleaner and cleaner air and cleaner environment and cleaner, you can see the marginal benefit by the time we get to 100%. Well, by the time we get to 90% clean, and then we're going to 99% clean, the marginal benefit of additional units of pollution reduction are going to get smaller and smaller and smaller. Getting the air clean so we can all breathe and it's healthy and it's not smoggy, that's great. But to remove every last particle of pollutant, those last few particles aren't really doing a lot of harm in the aggregate. And so the benefit of reducing pollution even further is pretty small. So you can see that there is a decreasing marginal benefit to pollution reduction. And at the same time, there's a lot of ways we can clean up that aren't very costly. There is some cost, producing things that, more in more environmentally friendly manners and things like that. But as we get rid of more and more pollution, we're going to have to give up more stuff. Right? We're going to have to stop driving cars, stop using any sort of machinery, stop using anything that uses, gas or even electricity, because generating electricity can generate negative externalities too. As we get more and more clean, at first maybe there's not that much cost, but to get rid of every last bit of pollution, to get rid of those very last microns, so there is nothing that we'd have to give up pretty much all manufactured goods. So we'd live in little, in the trees and eat. I don't. It's hard to say, but we would have to give up pretty much everything that is actually manufactured. In addition to get to absolutely totally clean, right? That would be really extreme. We'd have to, the marginal cost of those last units of pollution cleanup would be really high. So given that we know when we're getting our first units of pollution reduction that the benefit is enormous and we don't have to give up that much to get it. Yeah, we want to do that. But we also know at the other extreme, when we're getting those very last units to get those last little particles of pollutant out of the atmosphere, the benefit of that additional reduction isn't that big, and the cost is astronomical. It's enormous. That's not to say that some people might not think that that's the ideal place to be, but as a society, when we think about the benefits and the costs, we know that at really low levels of pollution reduction, the benefits exceed the cost. At really high levels of pollution reduction, at extremely high levels of pollution reduction, the costs are going to exceed the benefits, which implies that those lines have to cross somewhere, right? If the green line's high and gets low and the red line's low and gets high, there's a point where they're going to cross. And so that would be, I'll call it PR star, the socially optimal level of pollution reduction, which means if there's a socially optimal level of pollution reduction, then there's a socially optimal level of pollution. Somewhere between 0% clean and 100% clean, maybe 60% clean. I'm not saying that actually is the socially. I'm just explaining what I mean. So if we have pollution reduction, 60% clean means 40% not clean, right? So by saying there's a socially efficient level in which we want to invest in pollution reduction, that's saying that there's a socially efficient level of pollution that we're willing to accept. And that's a strange concept sometimes to get your head around, because you think if it's a bad, we don't want any of it. But this is where weighing benefits and costs are really important. Yeah, if it's a bad, we really don't want any of it, but there may come a point where we're eliminating more of it, the cost is greater than the benefit. Like crime. Crime's another example, right? We would like to have no crime. Unfortunately, there are crimers out there, or criminals, whatever you want to call them. And so to make sure there's absolutely no crime at all, we'd have to have people surveilling us 24/7, right? We'd have to pretty much give up all of our individual freedoms. And then if people are surveilling us, somebody has to surveil the people that are surveilling us, because just because you're in charge of preventing crime doesn't mean that you may not be susceptible to committing crime yourself, as we know. And so, so there is a point at which we say the additional benefit of reducing crime even further isn't worth what we would need to give up in terms of privacy and individual rights on what we're allowed to do and who's allowed to watch us doing it. So there is an optimal level of crime. There's an optimal level of safety, right? Of course, everyone wants to be safe. Nobody wants to die. But I remember seeing a show, it was on NPR, I was listening, and they were talking about putting car seats on airplanes, requiring everybody on the airplane to have a car seat for their infants. Because right now, if you're under 2, you can sit on your parent's lap for free, which makes it way cheaper for people to fly when they have small children. And they were saying, no, you should have to buy a seat for the child and put the car seat in. And people were talking about how much it would cost. And this woman said, if it saves just one child's life, it's worth any amount of money. And that's actually not true. And I wanted to just call her right then, except she was on NPR and I knew I wouldn't get through, and say, do you ever drive with your children? Because if you do, then you don't believe what you just said. If decreasing the probability of children having accidents to 0 is worth whatever we would have to, and even that would decrease it to 0. But if safety is worth anything, if preventing a child from dying is worth anything, you wouldn't drive with your children. You wouldn't, yeah. What we're saying, the added risk, the added cost is worth the benefit. We weigh the risk is low and the benefit of being able to get places faster and get to more places by using a motor vehicle is worth it. We're willing to accept the increased risk because of the added benefit. Same with flying on an airplane at all, right? Yes, airplanes might crash, but the benefit of being able to get far away places very quickly is worth the risk that we're taking. And so that's true with everything. Anytime there's a bad, I'm sure there's bads where the value of getting entirely rid of it is greater than the cost, and we would get rid of them. But in most cases, and most of the things we think about, crime and risk of death and pollution and all of these things, there's a socially optimal level of the bad thing, because there's a point at which getting rid of what it would cost us to get rid of the bad thing is more than what additional units, marginal units, remember we're talking on the margin. So once we're almost totally rid of the bad thing, getting rid of those last few units in a lot of cases is not worth the cost. And so the issue is finding that socially efficient level, and then finding ways to reach it through taxes or regulation, where you just say this is all you're allowed to emit, or this is all you're allowed to produce, or if you do it, we're going to charge you. And you can see if we imposed a tax, if we set a tax per unit of pollution, then I'd say I could either I could either clean up or pay the tax. And so when the marginal cost of cleanup is cheap, I'll clean up, and I'll just, instead of paying the tax, I'll clean up. Once I get to this point, it would cost me more to clean up than it would to pay the tax, so I'll just pay the tax. So if we set the tax right, people would clean up to exactly the point where it's a socially efficient level if we set the tax right. Again, it works a lot better on the whiteboard than it does in messy real life, but the concept is there, that there is some socially efficient level of pollution reduction or abatement of any social ill, and there may be debate on exactly where that level is, because how much you value something may be different than how much other people value something, but that level exists. And so part of the role of society is to find approximately where that level is, and then the government can implement taxes or regulations or things to try to get people to move towards that efficient outcome. But again, like with anything else, anything that changes the benefits or the costs, if we find ways to decrease pollution more efficiently, it would lower the cost of pollution, and then the socially efficient level of pollution would be higher because it's not as costly. Or if we could just convince people that pollution really is a danger, and thinking about climate change and things like that, right now the socially efficient level of abating greenhouse gases might be lower, because the socially efficient level takes into account everybody's willingness to pay, everybody's perceived. And so what we need to do if we want to combat climate change more is shift out that marginal benefit, that willingness to pay. We're willing to give up more if we can find ways to make people willing to give up more in order to abate the pollutants that lead to global warming and to climate change. Then the socially efficient level of abatement would be higher, and we could get policies behind that. So part of what campaigns to increase awareness of climate change are trying to sort of shift that marginal benefit curve out. So just like in regular supply and demand diagrams, if we can change the marginal cost, or decrease the marginal cost, or increase the marginal benefit, we could get to a higher socially efficient level of abatement of the bad thing, in this case pollution, and then develop government policies to try to move us closer to that level.